very good morning, everybody. Welcome to this latest BPF webinar. I'm particularly delighted to be hosting this one. We'd invited our guest speaker today, Matthew Griffin, to be the first keynote speaker at our residential conference, which will be on the 29th of April. Obviously, we find ourselves in a very place, and I'm grateful to Matthew for being prepared to do this electronically this morning. I know he's got a lot of quite exciting things, I think, to show you. Some things that he plans to do, other things that he is wanting that may get through the conditions that are in it, and just to make it a little bit more fun. Matt is CEO of the World Forum and 311 Institute. He has a hugely impressive biog. I won't read all of it, but he is a futurologist of mega trends and how those affect our lives. And just to give a flavour of some of the people that he works with, there's sort of 3 prime ministers, several governments, including the G7, a whole host of world advisory firms and multinational. And I know to be in Warsaw today, but finds himself in our webinar, and really grateful, as I said, for him being able to join us this morning. So over to you, Matthew.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. That's it, although I can't actually see you on my screen, but I'm going to assume that you're actually there. So as Ian sort of mentioned, what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through the future of housing. Now, bearing in mind that we're all in lockdown as well, I thought I'd try to make it interesting for you, but interesting in a different way. Obviously, not trying to make it boring. But if you have any young children basically around, or any older children around basically throughout the presentation, I'll be giving you little cues as to when they might be able to sort of come in and sort of see some videos that we have on screen around certain sort of different futuristic technologies and things. So as Ian explained, I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. We are a futures and deep futures think tank. So that means that we go up to kind of the next 20 years, and we can give you a view there. But if you're a sovereign government, if you care about the future of education, jobs, skills, transportation, housing, infrastructure, energy, all these kinds of things as well, the vast majority of governments want to go beyond 20 years. So at this point, we go up to 50 years out. So really kind of 2070. So there'll be lots of interactive content for you, trying to make your lockdown experiences more enjoyable. So there'll be some QR codes on the screen, and you'll see those on the video replays later as well. So feel free to scan those, basically, and then you can go and trawl through it all, basically, until you're to your heart's delight. So now sort of putting on my presenter's hat, taking off my teacher's hat, because the children are currently in the house doing some maths. We'll get to it. So if you have any questions, there's a Q&A system at the bottom, and I encourage you to use it. So as Ian mentioned, I work with a whole variety of different organizations, both across the energy space, but also basically the technology space and advisory spaces. I work with several governments, as well as basically companies like the X Prize, where we're sort of trying to put drones and different sort of lunar landers basically on the moon. So it's a fun time to be alive. And when we have a look at what's coming down the line, there are some real surprises. So I'm hoping basically that this is going to be a real sort of wormhole experience for you all. So this is Codex. Basically, some of the technologies that we talk about basically are in here. If you scan this, there are over 230 exponential technologies, all clearly laid out and explained for you. So if you have some older children, basically, and they want to understand a little bit more about molecular assemblers, get to it. So there we go. As we start having a look into the deep future, this is again a little bit of fun, but if you've got any children around, feel free to get them involved. The Scan Me QR code takes you to a whole variety of different sort of archive articles that demonstrate just how many science fiction technologies are now science fact. So in the spirit of fun, we're going to be stepping through a couple of those, but then we'll start breaking out. So if we have a look at holograms, holograms basically are inevitably a science fiction technology. However, Tail end of last year, we developed the first genuine holograms. You can look at these, so they'll come on the screen in a moment, but these don't use augmented reality. They don't use glass. They aren't fake in any way. If you think about the Star Wars holograms, these are the granddaddies of the Star Wars holograms. They're available in full color. They're little at the moment, but as with any technology, they start off kind of bleeding edge, very expensive, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually the technology matures over time to the point where you can buy these basically from your local e-tailer, maybe not retailer because you're still not allowed out. So this is a genuine example basically of a science fiction technology that is here today. And it's fully interactive, as you can see. So other technologies that we have, again, sticking with the Star Wars themes, a lot of people wonder when lightsabers are going to be around, seeing genuine lightsabers. And again, we've seen those come through. So they're called plasma swords. So if you like lightsabers and you were wondering when the world's first lightsabers were going to be coming through, the first ones came through last year, courtesy of researchers out in China, and they're very small. But again, there are articles you can read up on that if you like. And then neural streaming. So this is kind of the last science fiction technology I'll sort of go through. But increasingly using artificial intelligence. Increasingly using artificial intelligence and brain-machine interfaces, we're able to do some astounding things. These technologies are already being used within the healthcare constructs to help people with locked-in syndrome, so ALS, communicate with loved ones. But what you see on the left is we're showing an individual a geometric image. And on the right, we are using artificial intelligence and BMIs to literally read their mind from a picture perspective. So we're already getting to the point now where these images are being replaced by videos and movies, and people in Russia are now able to watch a video and it's translating, and these systems will translate that video of what they're seeing in their brain directly to screen. So would you like your children's brains basically streamed to YouTube? That's it. Maybe there's a little Christmas present for you guys there. That's it. I'm sure that'd be a lot of fun for you. But as you can see, this is streaming information from billions of human synapses in real time. So as we start moving on, we start having a look at the future of housing. Inevitably, basically, housing and the communities that we live in are incredibly important. You know, the importance basically of these spaces and places cannot be underestimated. Now, if you have a look at a government report that came out last year, the HM Government on Social Mobility Commission basically said social mobility is now virtually stagnant within the UK. As automation changes the world of work, inequality could worsen. So what I always think we have, I see as community leaders, I see as house builders, I see as people who invest in housing or have anything to do basically with these communities, I genuinely think that we all have a responsibility to make sure that everybody partakes of the riches basically of the future and that nobody is left behind. And there is a huge amount of change coming and we'll sort of walk through that. So inevitably, when you have a look at social mobility, if you come from a neighborhood that looks like the one on my right, but maybe your left, the one with the words on, inevitably the type of jobs that are going to be open to you, the type of education systems that are going to be open to you, and aka your future is pretty much already predetermined. And this is sort of one of the cycles basically that certainly personally I'm trying to break and would encourage everybody to try to break. And there are ways that we can do that. Now, when we start having a look at the pace of change, this is where normally I sort of ask, you know, how many of you think that we are moving faster today as a society, as a culture, as businesses from a technology standpoint than we did, say, 10 years ago? Now, if I assume that, you know, one of you might have stuck your hands up, then if I ask that same question, if I asked you that same question, we started moving that 10 years out. In the year 2030, do you think that as a society, we are going to be moving faster or slower from a technology standpoint? Bearing in mind that the faster and more powerful the technologies are that are coming through, the greater the impact, basically, and the bigger the type of change. So today, yeah, if we have a look sort of through the past, if I asked you what you might be able to do with technology next year in the 1980s, 1990s that you couldn't do, you know, last year, you might have looked at something like the line on the screen. Basically, that's something like Moore's law. Computing power is increasing. And you'd say, well, next year we could probably analyze and process more information. And as a result of that, we could do X, whatever it happened to be. So life was relatively local, life was relatively linear. If I ask you that same question today, though, in the year 2020, all of a sudden, I'm asking, what is your, you know, what are the impact of these different technologies on your industry? 3D printing, 5G, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, blockchain, you know, we'll miss quantum, but robotics, virtual reality, as well as basically all of the other things. You know, are you moving to the cloud? Are you becoming digital businesses? Is your industry digitizing? And at some point, basically, you're going to say, we just can't keep up. And increasingly, a lot of organizations basically have this problem basically around future proofing. And as all of these different technologies kind of come onto us, basically, we increasingly feel basically that technology and the future is something that is done to us and that we're sort of just being carried along by the tide rather than something that we are increasingly in control of. However, when you have a look at all these different technologies that are coming through, they do a variety of different things. One of the things they do basically is help reduce the cost basically of particular industries to zero. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example later of how we dramatically use some of these new technologies to dramatically reduce the cost of building buildings, let alone servicing buildings. So increasingly, when you have a look at the cost per transaction, whether that is building a house, whether it is property management, you know, using something like digital twins, but if you have a state. When we talk about the cost of electricity, we see the cost of electricity driving to zero. And in fact, in Dubai, we're already down at 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour. The cost of transportation, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the biggest changes, basically, that from an economic standpoint, these technologies have on industries. The cost of doing stuff falls dramatically while the capabilities increase exponentially. In addition to that, when we have a look at the rise of digitization, whatever happens in one industry invariably starts flowing through to other industries. So I've got examples again, but if you have a look at utilities, whatever happens in the electricity industry or the utility industry will ultimately have an impact basically on housing, transportation, even things like cooking, which then has an impact basically on things like education, agriculture. When you have a look at communications, basically with 5G, increasingly you're able just to take a house basically out of the network, and you're able to eliminate the fiber optic backhauls. So when you start combining all of these different technologies together to do different things, the change within each individual industry ripples through everything. Manufacturing has a massive impact basically on the housing sector, as does the technology industry. And again, we'll sort of step through that. So as a consequence, you know, as the sort of government report basically pointed out, and there's a White House report, there's also several European Parliament reports. When we have a look at the future, where increasingly we see some levels of automation coming through, plus as we start seeing a sort of more fast and furious future, increasingly there are more and more people that are looking for purpose. You know, which companies do they want to belong to? You know, what purposes do they want to align to? What communities do they want to belong to? And so this makes this whole concept of housing, but also within the construct of communities, increasingly important. Communities play a much more vital role in the future, particularly where there are going to be certain ravages from automation, not a lesser future. However, earlier, so I sort of showed you around 8 different exponential technologies. Those are the ones that most people sort of commonly talk about, like artificial intelligence. But again, when we start having a look at the rate of change, basically the things that the different technologies that we have in our tool bag that allow us to create fantastic new game-changing and revolutionary industries, products, services, and all those sorts of things, we don't actually have just 8 of these incredibly powerful technologies. This is my starburst. It's in the Codex with the QR link at the start. There are over 450 exponential technologies that I track, and there are only about 180 of them represented on this starburst. And as you can see, the way the starburst is aligned is you have manufacturing. If you want to develop a new product or service, irrespective of the industry that you operate in, you need to be able to make your product. You need to be able to add compute into that product. You need to connect it. You need to power it. Generally, you want to add some form of intelligence into it now. Even when we talk about smart buildings, we are putting artificial intelligence basically into smart buildings. Materials, and I've got some examples of materials, of material innovations basically within the housing and construction sectors that might surprise you. And then you might want to automate things, secure things. Increasingly, you want to put some sensors into products. So again, if we have a look at things like connected home, which has its own sort of benefits, but you might want to put sensors in there, and then you slap a user interface over the top of it, whether that's augmented reality, virtual reality, or just the screens that you're staring at today. But if we have a look at some of the technologies, we're going to go through some of the advanced manufacturing technologies in a little bit. I'll leave those off for now. But when we have a look at things like compute, increasingly powerful computing constructs, when you have a look at the sheer revolution that has been brought about by both computing and electronics, today, we stand on the verge of quantum computers that are 100 million times more powerful than regular logical computers. So if you think about the societal transformation that just computing and being able to compute stuff has brought about, we are going off the charts. However, as we start sort of looking a little bit further into the future, we already have molecular computers coming through, DNA and biological computers coming through. We've turned bacteria into computing devices. We have liquid computers coming through, neuromorphic computers coming through. There's lots going on there. So even today's most powerful supercomputers, one called Summit at the Department of Energy, can be packed onto a computing chip the size of a fingernail thanks to neuromorphic computing. So now start thinking that, as I sort of mentioned earlier, we accelerate, we continue to accelerate. From an electronics perspective, we have self-healing electronics, basically in biological electronics already coming through. From an energy perspective, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later as well. From an intelligence perspective, there we go. From an intelligence perspective, we have relative artificial intelligence today. Tomorrow, in sort of 2035, we have artificial general intelligence, where AI has the same level of intelligence and intellectual capabilities as humans. That's a societal changer there. We can also 3D print artificial intelligences and make them out of DNA. Materials, we have biomineralization materials, and that's actually relevant to the housing sector, and so on and so forth. But as I say, all of these different technologies are explained basically in the Codex. So if you're bored during lockdown, feel free to go and just flick through the pages. That's a guarantee to put you to sleep. Hopefully. Right, here we go. Now, as we start having a look at the future of the construction industry, again, this particular QR code on the screen here will take you to the future of construction sort of articles basically on my website. So you can sort of dig into all these different technologies and innovations basically in more detail at your own leisure. There's all sorts of new things that are coming through. So when you think about how we build houses, how we build communities today, today, as I mentioned earlier, your broadband is provided to you via a fiber optic cable into your house. But we already have home builders that are eyeing up 5G, for example, because once 5G comes, and 5G, there's various flavors of 5G. There's kind of really blazing fast 1.5 gig a second 5G, and there's sort of 100 megasecond 5G. 5G increasingly lets you cut the cord. So as a house builder, or as a company providing digital services or putting sensors into things, increasingly you'll be able to hook straight onto a very, very resilient 5G network, and you won't ever have to touch fiber. So that's just a sort of building change. Basically, from a user perspective, you can still stream YouTube and everything else, you won't really notice the difference, and frankly, you won't necessarily care that it's over 5G and not over your fiber optic network any longer. But, you know, this is still one of the sort of changes coming through. If you have any children around, basically if they want to see the future of construction, that's coming on a little video in the next slide. So when we have a look at construction, so we're increasingly at the point where we are already 3D printing communities, houses in Dubai in 2021. We want a 3D print skyscraper. We're laying the foundations for that. If you have a look at Dubai, by 2030, they want 25% of all new builds to be 3D printed. So if you have any children around, I see I'm going to press for the video now. Here's an example of a community that was first sort of talked about in kind of 2018, but that is now real. And there's lots of these examples. So that particular project has now taken place. Again, you can Google it and everything else. You can see the buildings. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of these different technologies reduce the cost of doing stuff. In France, we've 3D printed four-bedroom houses, as well as in Holland, we've started 3D printing villages. But the cost of 3D printing a four-bedroom house at the moment is about $24,000. Now, bearing in mind, these are robotic processes. We do need new materials. Those are already coming through and are here. If you take a robotic process and you automate it, today, basically, it costs $24,000 to 3D print a house that a family of four will live in and do live in. However, you fast forward about another 5 years, that's $5,000. Yeah, the cost of building a house is plummeting. IKEA recently announced, for example, that they were going to be building houses that were affordable and people could just bid what price house they would like. They say, I have £20,000, can you build me a house? And IKEA basically would go off and build them a house. These are the kinds of technologies that flip some of the housing industry on its head. What happens when you go to individuals and say, how much money have you got to spend? And they say, $25,000. You 3D print them a house. You combine that with some other technologies I'm going to show off as well. And all of a sudden, you can actually have some really, really interesting houses, because 3D printing, you can print very intricate designs. You know, we can get away from these brick monoliths, basically, that we all sort of live in, if we want to. Now, as we all start working, as we all work from home, recently a company called Doosan, in conjunction basically with 5G networks, when we have a look at telepresence, this is already being trialed. It's already working. We now have construction workers in Germany who are using telepresence technologies, so AKA sort of diggers in Germany, connected via 5G networks to control drone vehicles on construction sites. So we have now already reached the point where construction workers in Germany have built houses and homes and office blocks in South Korea using telepresence technologies. So when we talk about the gig economy and when we talk about decentralizing different industries and everything else, this is a great example. You know, are you able to make use of this yourselves, depending on the industry that you're in, or the part of the industry that you sort of care about? In addition to that, when we start stepping forward, we have organizations basically like Skydio, basically coming out of the US, where those human operators are increasingly replaced by drones with artificial intelligence in. We've been trialing these over in Dubai as well as in California. And rather than having a human telepresence operator controlling drone machinery on construction sites, for example, in South Korea, we now have drones and artificial intelligence project managers. In the UK, these technologies have already been highlighted to a variety of different industry bodies who've welcomed them, because when we have a look at project management basically within the housing industry, apparently there is a shortage of particular skills basically within the housing industry, and in the UK it's generally felt that these are a very good complementary technology basically that can sort of help lift the load. So we are already at the point where we are building buildings autonomously, but we're at the very start. Bearing in mind this accelerates out, these technologies get bigger, better, cheaper, they're able to build more complex things. When we have a look at sustainability, now I mentioned some sort of different technologies here. This is an example of the future of innovation and creativity. And we, again, already have these particular machines designing cities, houses, and all sorts of different products. So I'm going to play a little video. If you've got any children around again, this is the future of innovation. These are called creative machines, and they're already here.
What if you could come up with thousands of options for a single design without drawing, all of which meet specific goals set by the designer? And from those options, pick the one design that delivers on the most important criteria, the design you couldn't possibly have imagined. This is generative design, a technology that harnesses massive computing power, creating forms with precise amounts of material only where needed, achieving maximum performance while wasting nothing. But generative design can be about much more than simply turning out alternatives. Prototypes can be scanned and equipped with sensors that provide real-time performance data that can be looped back into the design process, so the object, in effect, co-designs itself. And depending on the material and method of manufacture chosen, the software can optimize the design for those choices. The things that have limited us in the past, software, materials, manufacturing, no longer do so. With generative design, the world can look and perform any way we want it to. This is the next stage in the evolution of design, and it's happening now.
So when we start applying that to the housing industry, because I put this in with sustainability, we can do the following. So we can now use these creative machines to design different products, including houses, including open spaces and communities, as well as cities as well. So these machines at the moment are capable of iterative innovation, but eventually they start moving through to primary and disruptive innovation. However, when you have a look at the underlying technologies, don't think about individual technologies. Think about how they can be combined to change the status quo for better. So here we have examples of artificial intelligence. AIs over time will get more powerful. We have more powerful computing platforms that those AIs can run on, which means that they can design better, more complex, more sophisticated products faster. We then have new materials and we have new advanced manufacturing technologies coming through. So for example, these creative machines can design a house and then get a 3D printer to 3D print it. Now, as I say, I put it into sustainability for the following reason. These creative machines, you can talk to them and say, design me a house using the minimal amount of materials possible. And they will go off and they'll run thousands of simulations a second to come back and say, I've designed a house and it might look like a regular house, but I've designed a regular looking house, but it uses, in some cases, these machines have dropped the amount of materials used by up to 80%. If we have a look at companies like Airbus who are using them to design aircraft parts and things. But this particular one is a NASA rover. So Autodesk and NASA got together. Autodesk went in, had a conversation with NASA and said, we think we have a new way to help you design the future of interplanetary landers. And NASA said to them, well, frankly, the only thing that we care about is weight. And the reason that we care about weight is it's very expensive to launch basically all of these different sort of satellite systems and products and everything else into space. And frankly, unless you're able to show us a product basically that can cut the weight of these platforms down by at least 20%, we're not interested. And frankly, we don't think you're going to be successful at all, because we have the world's top experts at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories down the road in Florida, who work on these problems. And over time, they've only been able to reduce the weight of our products by around 2 to 5%. So yeah, good luck, go away. And they sent Autodesk away with a flea in their ear. About 2 weeks later, Autodesk came back to NASA and said, we'd like to have a conversation with you. We think we've got something for you. And then NASA said, so we told you that in order to do anything, you need to cut 20% off the weight of our products. And I said, did you? And Autodesk said, no, we didn't. And NASA, well, why are you here? And Autodesk said, because we cut 30% of the weight off. Now you imagine using these different technologies basically to build more sustainable products. And it can be anything. We're using them to help design computer chips. You can go and buy Under Armour sneakers, basically called architect sneakers. They're about $300 if they're still available online. Airbus are using these creative machines to help them design the A330, a new A330 Neo aircraft. General Motors are starting to use these machines to help them design future cars. Because again, when you have a look at General Motors have managed to use these technologies to shave 50,000 pounds worth of weight out of their cars. So now think about the material savings from a sustainability perspective. It's huge. You're not moving the dial by 1%. What if you could cut the amount of material being used to build the UK's housing stock by not 1%, but by 30% or more? And these machines get better, but remember, huge savings, both in terms of cost, time, materials, footprints, etc. Now, when we have a look at materials, I did say that we'd have a conversation about materials. We've got green concrete coming through. So concrete contributes about 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions at the moment. But we're able to produce a green type of concrete now, basically, that is actually stronger than regular concrete, but without that carbon footprint. In addition to that, basically, we also have a new type of technology. And I mentioned a really weird technology on that when I showed the starburst, called biomineralization. So here's a little fun one. If you take a regular brick and you combine it with bacteria, a particular type of bacteria that does biomineralization, easy for me to say, those bacteria suck different gases out of the air, and they can do a variety of interesting things. So on the one hand, you now have bricks that self-heal. So if your brick gets a crack in it, it sucks carbon dioxide out of the air and the brick is healed. So think about that from a facilities and sort of maintenance perspective, the impact of self-healing materials within buildings and infrastructure and everything else. However, the real quirky thing of these bricks is because they use these bacteria, they can self-replicate. So if you have one brick today, they can literally replicate. And again, this is in the Codex, there's QR codes there, you can go and see the videos and things. So one brick becomes 2 bricks. 2 bricks becomes 4 bricks. So now you have a technology, a materials technology that not only self-heals and is green, but that replicates itself. What does that do basically for the future of housing and construction and stuff? In addition to that, when we have a look at the design of communities, if you think about, if any of you have got a salad in front of you, we have a picture of a cow. If any of you have got a salad in front of you, it's highly likely that that lettuce basically has traveled from Spain. It's done a trip of about 5,000 miles, depending on where you are. Just think about the carbon footprint of that. So when we're thinking about the design of communities, and again, if you have any children around, this is the future of food. So there's a little video coming up on the future of food. What would happen if we didn't need animals? What would happen if we didn't need farms or pastures? what would happen, bearing in mind that the agricultural industry contributes 20 to 30% of all greenhouse gases, what would happen if we could do something like this? If we could take just one chicken and feed the world. Here we go. Meet Ian.
We've all been there, right? In the grocery store. Oh, I'll just buy this meat. And there it is. And all we have to do is buy it. We don't have to think about what it took to make that chicken in that nice packaging. But the reality of the way that it came about, it's incredibly unsustainable. And that's one of the biggest problems facing humanity right now. But we figured out a way to solve it. The whole idea is that that chicken in itself has an unlimited source of itself, and there is a way where you can take just a handful of cells and keep growing them essentially infinitely. For those very first cells, it was important to us how we got the cells, not just that we got the cells. We came up with the idea to use one feather from the single best chicken that we could find.
They picked up.
The first thing we need to do is we need to identify a cell that we are going to use as the basic starter material. And then what we need to do is find a food for it to grow in. So we have to identify the right set of nutrients that will cause the cells to multiply, but not just multiply, but do so quickly and into high densities.
I want to lift you up. I want to dress you up. Let's be friends.
It was an out-of-body experience to sit there and eat a chicken, but have the chicken that you're eating running around in front of you. You don't imagine doing something like that.
So there you go, meet Ian. Now you start combining basically that sort of technology with vertical farms. And when we start talking about developing sustainable communities, if you take a technology like that, and we can apply the same to fish as well, by the way, not just meat. From a meat perspective, we can do that with cows. We can do that. We can take a cell from any animal and turn it into an Ian. Even zebras, which is a weird and slightly different conversation. So when we start thinking about urban agriculture and urban farms, when we're talking about developing sustainable communities, we can put vertical farms into the heart of a community and not only eliminate all the air miles that these foods travel, but these foods are organic. They use no hormones, no pesticides, no chemicals that are damaging nature. We can fundamentally change our relationship with our communities and with food, but for the better. So you end up with higher quality food that is organic, but it's local and it's actually cheaper because, again, it's a robotic process, so costs drop. And we all have lots and lots of examples of where these sort of vertical farm type technologies and things are actually already in use, for example, within Dubai, Paris, and so on and so forth. And I think we should see more of these in the UK. Now, from an energy perspective, I mentioned that energy basically is driving down to zero in terms of cost. So I work with companies like Centrica and RWE. So in 2025, the UK government has announced that they want all new builds to be off the gas grid. So they want houses to be electric only, so the electrification of the housing stock. I can already disconnect you, your community, your individual house, basically from the energy grid, because I can put a solar panel on your roof and disconnect you. If I provided you with those solar panels for free, and if they lasted forever without any maintenance, the cost of electricity to you at home is zero. And most of you will probably be paying between what, 800 to £1,500 in electricity and gas costs today. We eliminate that. In addition to that, basically from the energy industry's perspective, we eliminate about another 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. However, if you're thinking that solar panels basically in the UK are a bad idea because we don't have much sun, we have lots of cloud, then recently, if we have Perscovite solar panels, we can get to 32% efficiency. You know, most silicon solar panels today are about 17%. The ones you'd buy for your roof today are 17% efficient. Perscovite solar panels are already 32% efficient. We've now broken the record on a type of bacterial solar panel, which is 50% efficient. If you use carbon nanotubes, a weird technology on my starburst to reclaim heat within solar panels, you can push the efficiency of solar panels to 80%. If you put a layer of graphene over a solar panel, you can harness energy from rain, snow, and using different materials, we now even have solar panels that work at night. So when you think about the future of electrification of houses, you know, if you're a business, depending on the type of business that you're in, you could put a lot of different solar panels basically onto houses. You could create your own fully autonomous, localized microgrid, as they're known, and you could sell energy to that community as a service if you wanted to, you know, to earn money from it. So there's lots of sort of different things that you can do with these. From a water perspective as well, today, basically, when you turn on your taps, that comes basically through pipes in the ground. Over in Africa, we've recently deployed a bunch of new technologies that suck moisture out of the air and can generate 200 litres of drinking water a day. So just as we can disconnect you from the gas grid, the electric grid, from broadband and communications, we can also disconnect you if you really wanted to. And it's a bit more of a push, admittedly, but if you really wanted to, we could disconnect your house basically from the water supply. We could then use graphene basically to purify everything. And that's a game changer. There are graphene-based straws on Amazon that you can buy for $24 that will allow you to drink sewer water if you're that way inclined. And it's fine, but I've never tried it. I don't really want to. But nevertheless, the technology is there. When we have a look at connected homes as well, again, from a sustainability perspective, you know, you're out of the house, it turns itself off. When you're out of the house, basically you have a variety of different wearables. These wearables basically are going to be increasingly sensitive and connected. The number of sensors that we have in them will increase. One of the sensors that's coming through is cortisol levels. So when you are allowed out of the house, and provided we don't all turn into a bunch of agoraphobics, these sensors will be able to tell your stress levels. And what they could do is when you go back home, the connected watch that you're wearing or whatever, but the connected watch that you're wearing senses that you're stressed. And as you start traveling home, it sets your house up with the appropriate mood. We 3D print food off in the kitchen. It sets your house up to play calming music, turns the lights down, all this sort of stuff. But in addition to that, these connected homes, particularly from a county council perspective, now mean that we can keep the elderly in their own homes much, much longer than ever before. So Essex County Council have been rolling out a lot of different connected homes. And they reckon that typically putting an elderly person into care basically is a couple of £1,000s a week. Being able to keep them at home is actually better for them, yeah, generally, but it also helps you cut costs by about 60 to 70%. And when we talk about staying at home longer, where's my phone? When we talk about staying at home longer, again, what you have in your hand is a tricorder. If you take artificial intelligence and you combine artificial intelligence with the camera, then I can look like I'm taking a selfie, but I'm actually checking myself for pancreatic cancer. Because when you get pancreatic cancer, you can see yellow in people's eyes. I can do the same thing, check myself for skin cancer. If I talk into the phone, I'm using artificial intelligence and the microphone to determine whether or not I have ADHD, PTSD, the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's and all these sorts of things with a 90% accuracy. If I take the accelerometer that's in the phone and I put it to my chest, I can detect whether or not I have the onset of heart disease. So when we talk about the things that we can do with connected home, these are becoming increasingly powerful and let us diagnose more symptoms than ever before, more accurately than ever before. And by the way, in that past, 2 minutes, I've just essentially done a health checkup. If I talk into the phone as well, it can tell that I'm getting ill, because when you get ill, you typically sort of sound gravelly like this. And as we have a look at coronavirus, for example, again, it's on my website. But as we talk about coronavirus, these same technologies are now being used to let you talk into a microphone on your computer to determine whether or not you have or are likely to have coronavirus, because the voice gives away a huge amount of information. And that's being run by some of the US universities, by the way. So on the one hand, and then in addition to that, if you have a Wi-Fi router, courtesy of MIT, we can push an artificial intelligence firmware update to your Wi-Fi router. And then all of a sudden, your Wi-Fi router can now sense whether or not you're ill, because a artificial intelligence turns your Wi-Fi router into the equivalent of sonar. So if you're limping, if you're on the floor, it can tell people. So those are becoming incredibly powerful. When we have a look at well-being, Hull County Council recently trialed community crypto. So again, if you're doing good in the community, if you're volunteering, if you're being helpful and kind to your neighbors, they will literally give you cryptocurrency and they will give you a discount off your council tax bill. Because up until now, if you volunteer, there's not really been any way to record what you've done or who you've done it for, or the things that you've achieved. So community crypto schemes basically actually help reward the community in new ways to do good things. As we look at the future of training and education, this little QR code takes you to a future of education and training codex. So again, if you have young children or older children, basically it's an interesting read. But when at the start of the presentation, I said that community in the future is even more important. And the reason for that is if you think about just the sheer amount of automation that's coming through, we're already seeing the automation of lawyers, of doctors in certain settings, surgeons, brain surgeons. We're also seeing the automation basically of manufacturing again, of insurance clerks, basically of data scientists, of AI programmers. As automation continues its rise, basically, sort of through this Industry kind of 4 analogy, all of the things on the screen are going to become much more important for us as humans. These are the soft skills: adaptability, confidence, creativity, entrepreneurship, empathy, ethics. Now, just think basically about how communities help foster every single one of these different soft skills. Are you maximizing? We talk about the contribution to the economy and to each other, but designing communities in new ways, or at least bringing these in, actually help us better prepare for the future as individuals. And then, as I say, this is sort of why these ideas of community spaces are so increasingly important in the future. There shouldn't be just places where people in spandex go. They should be entrepreneurial centers, inspirational hubs of learning, basically engagement and socialization and all sorts of things. So we have that. Now, finally, we sort of come on to the last bits. When we have a look at the future of mobility, because again, house prices are impacted by mobility. There's a huge amount of change. If you're sitting, for example, on the outskirts, basically, of the A4, I used to trudge up and down the A4 all the time. You have houses that are covered in soot. The occupants are only ever exposed to noise. Think about a future, basically, where there is no pollution and where there is no vehicle noise, for example. Now think about the value of that land stock, but also think about the benefit of these newer technologies, basically, to those individuals who live on the margins of these roads, as well as in very busy communities near motorways and so on and so forth. So transportation itself, it's more mobility than transportation, will increasingly become on demand. Increasingly, you won't own a car. You'll just call a car up on demand from Mercedes or Tesla or Uber or Lyft or wherever you want to get one from, and it will just drive itself to you and pick you up and take you wherever you want to go. Just that on-demand piece basically should reduce the amount of traffic on our roads by 30%, and in our communities. Have a look out your local windows. How many cars are parked on the curb? How many arguments have you all had basically about, you know, car parking spaces and everything else, particularly with today's planning laws, which frankly I think are daft and don't actually help really the communities at all. When we have a look at transportation, it's being electrified. You know, we can see this all around us, basically electric cars, hybrid cars, and it's not just cars, it's vans, it's semi-trucks, it's cargo ships, it's aircraft. Everything in the transportation space is being electrified. And of course, when we have a look at the electrification, today, basically you sort of plug, if you have a Tesla, you plug it into your Tide grid storage sort of charger basically on your wall. These technologies are coming through faster and faster and faster. Today you have electric cars with lithium-ion batteries in that you end up plugging into your supercharger at home. We already have wirelessly charged electric vehicles coming through from BMW. So if you think about that, you can design your houses differently again. Thirdly, we also have solar-powered cars basically coming through true solar-powered cars that never need to be plugged in from Hyundai, Toyota, and Lightyear One. Remember that solar panels basically get better, they're flexible. We even have spray-on solar panels coming through. So even when you have a look at wireless charging can help you take out 80% of the lithium-ion batteries basically within electric vehicles. When we start using different technologies in depth, you can eliminate the batteries from cars and vehicles completely. This is the Terzo Millennio that you see on your screen from Lamborghini. Again, you can look it up. It looks like it'll be available in 2030. It uses a type of battery called a structural battery. Again, carbon nanotube tech. What's special about this car, and we have other cars already coming through as well, is that the shell of the car is the battery. No lithium-ion batteries in this one. And this is a hypercar. So when we have a look at the future of electricity and energy, as I say, we're fossil fuels today, basically they're smelly, basically we have a lot of diesel particulates. During lockdown, we've seen the amount of diesel particulates basically just drop off a cliff. People in India for the first time have been able to see the Himalayas because smog is gone. So after lockdown and after COVID, hopefully basically all these technologies will continue to accelerate. But we have biofuels, basically we have wireless charging, we've got structural batteries coming through. These are for vehicles as well. We have 3D printed lithium-ion batteries. If you think that when you buy an electric vehicle or have an electric vehicle on demand, it's going to have a bunch of batteries in and needs to go to a charging station, that's old tech already. We already have all this new stuff coming through. Which means fundamentally, as you look out your front window at all the cars basically jamming up the streets and your driveways, you can get rid of them. So you get your front gardens back. Your communities basically change because you have no vehicles, or you have a dramatic reduction in the number of vehicles that you have going around your communities. Pollution drops, healthcare and asthma, people with asthma basically feel a bit better. And so on and so forth. There are lots of health benefits basically to these technologies. As well, basically when we have a look at cars, we're taking the operator out of vehicles. Consider this, we have already started seeing the death of the car. Because if I take the steering wheel out of your car, if I take the pedals out of your car, the dashboard out of your car, do you have a car or do you have an autonomous pod? You have an autonomous pod. Your car is dying. And when you have an autonomous pod, you can do a whole variety of new things. So firstly, shops can come to you. This is the Toyota e-Pallet. It can come to you. In the morning, it doubles up as a commuter bus, basically, so you can take your children to school or take you to work if you're allowed out. In the afternoons, it turns itself, it goes back to base and it becomes a shop, etc., etc. So again, reinventing basically how we build infrastructure and roads and things. This one's a quirky one. We can do, this is just for quirky purposes. This is a fully autonomous motel room. So if you want to travel from city A to city B, you can take an airplane, or you could take a fully autonomous travel suite. So these are already starting to be produced in America. However, and so if you have children around, again, this is really just a bit of fun now. In Dubai, basically we've been in Dubai and Germany, we've already trialed these. We have flying cars coming through, but flying cars, they're not really flying cars, they're flying drones. So this is one that we tested out in Dubai in 2017. It's a velocopter, which is now owned by Mercedes. But this is changing how we use roads, how we use transportation, where we live. This goes 400 miles an hour. Do you want to go and work in Newcastle, but live in London? This changes where we live and how we live, how we build communities. And we've got these coming through from Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, Mercedes, BMW, Airbus, Audi, and they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. So that was the Mercedes one. However, and I promised Ian basically this, if we want to really ratchet up the future, how would you like to live in one country or a house in one country, future housing, and work in another? So we actually have green fuel for this next one coming through, courtesy of NASA. But volocopters travel at about 400 miles an hour. This one goes a little bit faster, and we've done the first 70 flight tests already. And this one will start coming out and appearing in about 2024. And the cost of traveling on one of these basically will be eventually at the cost of a standard airline ticket. So if you have children around, basically it's, here we go, the future of transportation. Elon Musk style. And there we have it. So a little bit of fun. So I hope you've enjoyed the rocket ride. When we talk about the future of housing, we've got to remember it's the future of people, communities. It's the future of us. And with all of these different technologies that are here today, as I've demonstrated, just imagine basically how we could reimagine housing and communities basically for a better future for all of us. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you all managed to stay awake. And yeah, thank you for joining our webinar.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That has come up on the chat from Alexandra. She's said amazing presentation. I can only agree. It was mind blowing in parts. Not sure on the chicken called Ian, but brought to mind the Back to the Future phrase. Nobody calls me chicken, but other than that, just as I say, mind blowing. We had, I think, a couple of questions which we can maybe rattle through. The first was one that had come to my mind as well, which was from Antara, and she says, prop tech and construction tech are notoriously slow on uptake. What do you think are the most significant barriers to adoption in the UK? I suppose my thinking was the other way around, and that are there particularly good examples of non-technology sectors that are very good at adopting technology? Yeah,
no, absolutely. So yeah, when it comes to adopting these technologies, or not really adopting these technologies, but just getting a point of view, are these technologies interesting? Are they then interesting enough for you to want to do something with, and so on and so on. So it's culture and regulation. As we see, as I travel around the world, when I'm allowed, as I travel around the world, we have countries that are using all of these different technologies to transform different parts of their economies for different reasons. And in the UK, when we have a look at the UK housing sector, status quo basically is a bit of a killer. But culturally, I'm a little bit saddened basically sort of in the UK, basically that we aren't using more of these technologies basically in anger. And my general feeling is that we're getting left behind. Particularly when we have a look at the future of construction, Eastern Europe, North America, the Middle East, even Africa, basically, and certainly China, basically, are already well ahead. But get a point of view, adopt the right culture, which is typically an open culture, and then go and experiment with some of these things. You don't have to use them now, but get a point of view, go and see them, experience them, prod and poke them, and then put them into your company's horizon plan or vision, and put them into your roadmap. That's it. It's actually not difficult to get a point of view, as we've sort of seen today.
I think the challenging circumstances of today, actually, I think are forcing. I've seen the use of more technology in the construction sector over the last few weeks. Inspections being done by drone, people trying to find workarounds for the social distancing, and that's meant using 3D printers to produce new products that weren't out there and been designed in house. So I think maybe when push comes to shove, perhaps people are greater adopters of technology, and that may be one of the positive things that comes out of the sorry circumstances we find ourselves in at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, for example, we have autonomous cars basically that are delivering food to food banks now. We've got drones that are disinfecting streets basically in China. And again, if you sort of go to the website, there's a COVID banner. We've got AIs and supercomputers that are trying to create vaccines and all sorts of things. But, unfortunately, often companies, basically people need a shove. I mean, coronavirus basically is a horrible shove, frankly, and hopefully it will never come around again, although it's a bit unlikely. But these technologies are actually, during current times, these automated technologies are actually now, as you say, being pushed and actually being trialed. And a lot of the trials are actually coming forwards because you don't have an option. As you say with drones, you can't. We've got building sites around here. They're being quiet. They're sitting quiet for 1 or 2 months now. But we do see drones and other technologies coming through, basically to help companies still try to keep some semblance of plans in place.
There's one other question from Karen, which I think is personal to you, so I'll let you answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, hi, Karen.
Directly.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Absolutely, when we have a look at security. So, when we have a look at security is a whole conversation, and feel free just to chat with me offline. But when we have a look at, for example, security, basically, of telepresence platforms, basically, we can do end-to-end encryption. 5G is especially good at encrypting data, basically, at speed and all that sort of stuff from an end-to-end. When we have a look at the tools that cyber attackers have in their arsenal now, particularly the weaponization of artificial intelligence, security is just going to be this insanity, sort of moving into the future. Certainly, when we have a look at remote working in other countries, end-to-end encryption, and that's really the main one. Some of the other technologies that are coming through, like deepfakes, and again, if you go to the Codex, it's a big Codex with the QR was at the start and on the screen now. You can have a look at the section called creative machines. So the future of innovative machines are in there, but also the future of deepfake machines and things are in there as well. Security has always got to be forefront, but for what we'd be looking to do, work remotely, encryption is actually good enough.
I'm conscious that people will be teeing up for lunch, so last question from Georgia, who's wondering if you actively invest in the technologies, or the particular things that you think are just sort of mind-blowing and that people should be investing in.
Yeah, so I'm one of those people. I play around with other people's money, so I don't invest myself. However, I actually work with global asset managers, basically like Legal & General. So we have about $1.2 trillion basically under asset. BlackRock with about $7 trillion under asset. And ironically, particularly when we have a look at sustainability, I've sort of found basically that on the one hand, let's say, for example, you take the oil companies, you can encourage them to do the right thing and say, we think that the right thing is X, Y, and Z, and you validate it and quantify it and all those kinds of things. But ultimately, if you take an oil company, for example, and they just go, you know what, we're just not interested in helping the green agenda, save the planet, whatever it happens to be, then certainly shareholders, basically, so companies like Legal & General and BlackRock can go to them and say, well, if you don't buck up, we'll just sell the stock. When you have a look at the European Union as well, the European Union is now getting companies to promote ESG values first, so environmental, social, and governance values first. And then in addition to that, when you have a look at the global asset managers are increasingly only really investing in organizations that have green credentials, that are ethical, which has always been a thing, but ethical, sustainable, moral businesses. There's also a rule basically called the shareholder primacy rule. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if you have a look at the vast majority of PLCs today, one major complaint of PLC that people have of PLCs is that they only operate quarter to quarter. They aren't interested in the future because you have to invest. And so they're interested in quarterly results. About this time last year, about 180 of the Fortune 250 CEOs, Matt Damon, Jeff Bezos, all got together in New York as part of something called the Business Roundtable. And they decided that they would kill off the shareholder primacy rule that was put in 1990. Now, what this essentially means is that that means that over 180 Fortune 250 CEOs and their companies are going to shareholders and saying, we are now going to be investing in communities, social programs. We are going to be investing for the future. We're going to be building the future in a way that we've never built or invested in it before. And if you don't like that, get out of our stock. And so increasingly, when we sort of have a look at these, certainly investments, I come across basically a lot of really interesting companies basically that are doing some very interesting stuff. And when you start tracking the success or the likelihood of success of a lot of these different technologies, like Ian the chicken, you can see the technology. Then you see entrepreneurs come in and ecosystems develop, but then you see investors coming in And if you have a look at the future of agriculture technology, Jeff Bezos just invested $250 million. Ocado, basically, if you use Ocado have invested in vertical farm startups. So the lettuces that you buy in the future from Ocado will likely come from their warehouse, not from Spain. So the investment space is a really exciting space to be, but it's a really great opportunity to help make a big difference. So yeah, I play around with other people's money. It's the best way to do it.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That's been fantastic, and yeah, really teed up the bank holiday weekend. There's a lot. I hope a lot of people will go back and have another look at the slides. And that only leaves me to say to all those that have viewed, yeah, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the bank holiday weekend yourselves.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, everybody.